This is the Honda Civic. First we have to change the timing belt, then the water pump. First step is take off the tire.
Next we have to take the splash guard off the bottom. These are the bolts. This is what it looks like with the splash guard off. We disconnect the negative terminal. First we remove this plastic cover. Next step is to remove these two brackets, this plastic piece, and the coils. The next thing you want to do is label your coils.
Right the full left, not just L.
Remove these two bolts.
Remove the wiring harness. Just put it to the side. Remove the dipstick. Remove the vacuum hose.
To remove this hose, take that rusty bolt off there. And this bolt here. Remove the valve cover. To make sure you don't drop anything in here, you want to put a rag over top.
The power steering reservoir. Loosen this nut.
In this counterclockwise, it'll drop the power steering pump and you can remove the belt. Okay, now remove the power steering pump by taking off this bolt, this nut, and the nut down there. Now remove the power steering pump and lay it over on the side. Now we're going to take the belt off the alternator. We're going to start by loosening the top bolt. That's right here. We're going to loosen the lower alternator bolt, which is this one here. It's a 12 mil. Now you're going to loosen the wing nut counterclockwise and it'll drop the belt and release it. Now that it's loose, remove the belt. Now to remove this plastic cover, we're going to remove that rubber boot, the 10 mil bolt, and the 10 mil bolt on this side. Now remove this plug. Now you can remove the cover. Now we have to remove the crankshaft pulley or the dampener pulley. There's three ways of doing it. The best way to take it off is with an impact gun. If you don't have an impact gun, you can use this special tool. Okay, you're going to put the tool in like that with a bar on it. Then you're going to put with a ratchet and a socket on the other one, and you'll put them the opposite ways, loosening it. This is not the best way, but if you don't have any other tools, you can put the chain lock around it and loosen the bolt from the center. Now we're going to pull it off. On Hondas, you won't need a puller, you just wiggle it off. Watch out for the woodruff key. Make sure you don't lose that when pulling it out. This is what it looks like without the pulley.
To take off this cover, you take off 4 bolts. Here, here, and then the 2 up top. Next, to get to the timing belt, we have to take off this bracket. So what you do is you take off these 3 bolts here. 1, 2, 3. To take off the alternator, you have to take off the bottom bolt and then the top bolt. Now you need to drain the antifreeze. You have to support the engine from the top or bottom. We are supporting it from the bottom. You do that so you can support the engine. Take off these 3 bolts. Now take off the mount.
Removing this bracket here. There are 3 bolts over here and then 2 over here.
Line the line on the crankshaft pulley up with the arrow on the block. Make sure the up label is up on the cam pulley.
We put a secondary mark on the cam.
And we put a secondary mark on the crankshaft because the car came in running.
Loosen the timing belt tensioner.
With a long screwdriver, take the tension off the tensioner by prying it. Tension's removed, slide the belt off the top. Transfer the secondary marks onto the new belt. Now we're going to remove the water pump. If it's in the engine, there's going to be 4 bolts here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remove those. Once you've removed all 4 bolts, you can pull out the water pump. Clean the mounting surface with emery cloth before putting in the new water pump. Clean it by rubbing it like this. Now that it's clean, install the gasket on the new water. When you're putting in the new gasket, make sure it's wedged between these tabs.
Close this drain plug here.
Run your hands along here to make sure there's no bumps and it is clean. There's 4 bolts. One of them is smaller. It goes on the bottom left side. Torque the 4 bolts down to 9 foot-pounds. Put this clip back on the side of the water pump. Putting the timing belt back on, start on the crankshaft, then go around the tensioner, the water pump, and then end with the top pulley. Put the belt around the crankshaft pulley, making sure your marks are lined up. Release the pressure on the tensioner and slide the belt on, making sure that your marks line up. Make sure both marks are lined up. Reattach this bracket by putting the 2 bolts under here and the 3 bolts here, here, and over here back on. Put this top motor mount back on with these 3 nuts. When those are tight, you can then take the jack out. Put the bottom cover back on the motor. This is with the cover reinstalled. Now we're going to put the pulley back on. Make sure you put this woodruff key in the notch right here. It should look like this with the woodruff key in the middle of the slots. Now insert this bolt and tighten it to 14 foot-pounds and then add an additional 90-degree turn. In case you were wondering, the bolts for this bracket, the 5 bolts, they get bolted down to 33 foot-pounds. And the bolts for this top mount here are 40 foot-pounds. For the cover right here and the one that would cover here on the top, they get bolted down to 7.2 foot-pounds. Put the alternator back in place by installing this bolt and the bolt that's down on the bottom. When installing the top plastic cover, there's 3 bolts. 2 of them are the same size and they go on the outsides, here and here. And then the last one that has a little bit longer metal part here, it goes through this one. When putting this cover on, tighten this bolt, and this bolt to 7.5 foot-pounds. Now reinstall the power steering pump bracket by putting the 3 bolts back in. Install the alternator belt by turning the wing nut down here before installing the power steering pump to make it easier. Make sure you tighten the upper and lower bolt of the alternator after tightening the belt. This is the upper bolt for the power steering pump. Slides through this way and then nut goes on the end. Once the power steering belt is tight, tighten this bolt here and the one below. Before putting the valve cover on, put silicone around the whole edge and in the 90-degree corners here, one in the back, there, and on the front so oil doesn't leak out. Now put the valve cover on. Tighten down these 5 bolts to hold the valve cover in place. When you're putting the bolt in for the valve cover, they have a metal stop built in, so stop when the bolt doesn't turn anymore.
Put the wiring harness back on, and then the throttle cables.
Putting the bolts on here and here.
Put the coils back on in the correct sequence and not over tighten the screws. Put all the coil plugs back on.
Install this bracket by putting this bolt and this bolt on to hold the AC line. Bracket on that holds these 2 hoses. It goes into that hole and this little tab sits like that.
Hook up the negative battery terminal, tighten it, and then fill the coolant.
When the coolant's full, start the car. Now the vehicle runs.